so I looked at strategies for effective illustrations and other visual aids, and I mainly based my presentation off of Chapter 19 in Carolyn Rood's book Technical Editing. So here's an outline of my presentation. I'm first going to look at how to kind of manipulate emphasis in your visual aids, and then we're going to look at how scale, size, perspective, and the concept of data ink influence how your visual aids are perceived. Okay, so in order to look at, in order to have some data that, or a visual aid that we're going to kind of manipulate in terms of a visual aid that we're going to manipulate to see how all of these strategies will change our perception of this information. I looked at this pie graph that was posted by the Falcon Post in an article, "Where on Earth is All the Money Going?" And it's basically a pie graph of where the U.S. government gets its funding. So, all right. So first we're going to look at. First we're going to look at emphasis. So the different, components of emphasis would be size, color or shading, labels, foregrounding, white space, shape, sequence, and typographic cues. Okay, so first, here's size. So here's my little attention scale. So on the high attention scale side, we have large size things. Bigger things get our attention more than small things do. So here's an illustration of that using our pie graph. All right, so here's the original, our original pie graph from the article. And then you see if we increase the font size on individual income tax receipts, it kind of pops out to us more. It seems like it's emphasized more than everything else. All right, next is color and shading. Bright colors get attention more than dimmer colors, and dark shading gets our attention more than light shading. Alright, so here's a graphic that I got from a website that talks about how colors can be manipulated. So basically, what we're looking at here is as we go up the lightness scale, the colors get lighter. As we go over, across, increasing chroma, we're also increasing brightness. And then as we go radially across, we're increasing the saturation. So, so it forms kind of a diamond there with the brightest color at the furthest most point. And another thing that can impact our perception of how bright colors are is the hue of the colors. So yellows and greens are perceived as, yellows and greens tend to be more bright than blues and reds. So when you have a blue or a red that is just as bright as a yellow or a green, the yellows and greens are going to appear dimmer, not as bright. So when you're looking for bright colors, you could use the yellows and greens that we can typically think of, which are the high saturated, high chroma yellows and greens. Alright, so here's an example of this. So this is our original pie graph, and then if we, this is for shading first. So if we take away the shading portion that we have done there, that's drawing our attention down, it doesn't look like there's a substantial portion at the forefront than there did in the original piece. And then in addition to that, so here's our original piece. If we increase the brightness of one of our pie sections, it kind of pops out of this more. It seems like it's more important than it did in the original one. All right. Okay. So, so looking at labels. If something is labeled, it has a high attention scale versus things that don't have labels. So here's our original pie chart, and then look what happens when we take off some of our labels. guess those parts don't matter. Alright. Next we have foregrounding. If an element is in the background, it kind of loses our attention more than an element that's in the foreground. Alright, so we can see from the pie chart that since we're in 3D, the portions closest to us pop out more and they seem more important, and we'll see this in a bit. But if we create the same pie chart and we turn it face up, see how the top portions appear much larger than they did in the original. You see how they kind of diminish, but here they don't. Alright, so another emphasis technique is manipulating white space. If an element is closely surrounded by other elements, it has a lower attention value than elements that are surrounded by white space. So let's look at this this label right here of corporate income tax receipts. If it's in here with all the rest of them, it pops out less than if we increase our white space and put the label right out there. Okay. Shape discontinuities can also influence how things appear to us. So if elements are of the same shape, each has less attention factor than elements that are different from the elements around them. So, okay, this can be using, I guess in the previous example, using triangles instead of circles, or it can also be, when we're looking at circular graphs, it can be offsetting them from the rest. So when we pop that slice out, it's emphasized more. Okay, sequence. Middle elements generally tend to get our attention less than first and last elements. So this doesn't really apply to pie charts because they're circular, but a very good example of this is our ABCs. We refer to them as ABCs, or you can talk about from A to Z, but you don't really hear people talking about reciting your LMNOPs. So, alright. Typographic cues also influence how we perceive things. So, typographic cues are things like arrows or boxes that set things out. So, no cues, low attention. Cues, high attention. Alright, so no cues. And then if we add an arrow pointing to that pie slice, that gets our attention more. Okay, perspective. This is very interesting. A good example of perspective in graphs is the pie chart that we were looking at when we flip it straight up. So when we turn it into 3D and we change our perspective, it makes things appear like they aren't really. So here's another fun thing that can happen with perspective when we're taking photographs. So basically perspective is manipulating things in 3D. Alright, so size can also influence how we perceive an image. So this is a screenshot of the original article, online article, where I got this image, and so here's the original size. And then if we decrease the size, it doesn't seem as important. You notice that? Okay, and then look what happens when we increase the size. It really pops out. Okay, scale can also influence how we perceive an image. So this is just some sample data that Microsoft Office provided for me. And if our X scale is stretched out more, or Y scale is stretched out more relative, we can appear to have different things going on. So it looks like in the graph on the left, it looks like things aren't changing that much throughout time. On the graph on the right, it looks like things are dramatically changing. And that's just based on how we manipulate our scale. Okay, maximizing data ink. So data ink is a term that was coined by Edward Tufte, and he said that in any graphic, the most ink should be used to highlight the most important parts or the most interesting data. So I had a few examples of this, but it's basically you need to figure out, based on what message you're trying to bring across to your audience, what needs to be emphasized or de-emphasized. So here's our, here's our flipped up pie chart, and you notice that the top portion is de-emphasized in our original one, and it's emphasized in this one right here. So more data ink is given to the top portion in this up top view than in this view, the perspective view. And then also here, we give more data ink to the individual income tax receipts by pulling it out and adding more data ink to that area. Okay, and then here we see that a lot of data ink is given to spelling out category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4. This illustrates another principle that is important when thinking about data ink. You don't want to have, I guess, redundant or superfluous information taking up a lot of your data ink. So you might want to change this to be something like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then give your axis as category. So, all right, so those are those strategies. Any questions? Yes.
Considering we've been going a lot over ethics today, I've noticed a lot of times that people have exploited the strategies that you've demonstrated in order to bias data substantially. Like that pie chart is a fantastic example. When you just tilt it on its side, I've seen the same pie chart used or similar pie charts used for government spending, where they'll like put the side with military, in the foreground in a three-dimensional angle, and then on top of that they'll have like guns sprouting out of the little military chunk, and it's just really starting to to glorify the American military, and it's just this very brutal way of manipulating data that should be presented in an objective manner, I feel. So is there any way that you could recommend us to avoid misrepresenting data? Like, would you just recommend like the same top-down view? Because a lot of times, especially when you're new to Excel, and you click on the chart feature and you realize, whoa, I can make it 3D and look really cool and give it all these colors and layers. Would you recommend just, lessening that for the sake of preserving our ethical standpoint?
Yes, I would recommend, the top-down view. I'm not a big fan of pie charts in general, though, because a lot of times, like when you have colors, you can
It's
really
difficult to manage them.
Yeah, you can really get messed up with that. Yes.
Would you say, kind of piggybacking off his topic, would you say in general that the things that in the presentation, like in the general mainstream media, that are more used for negatively displaying data than positively displaying data? Like if it's going to be something that they're trying to do something negative, they do what Matt was saying, there's guns pointing out of it and it's in the front. Whereas if they're trying to exploit some other side, they basically use it to their own exploitation. Would you say in general that's more popular?
I think it is because our world is, it seems like people like to be persuasive to get people to see their opinion the way they want people to see it. But I guess there could be situations in which, I guess the negative and positive aspects of manipulating data are kind of, I don't know, it kind of blurs together. It's a very interesting ethical issue, though. Yeah. Yes. Did you have a question, Andy?
Yes, I did. Just because this comes up a whole lot, how do you deal with numbers in a presentation visually?
Like.
How many? If I spend $4,724,659.73 for my budget this last year, how do I present that?
That's a good question. It seems like it's you'd have to think about your audience and think about do they need exact amounts or are they just rough ballpark people? Things like that. Good point. Right. Any more questions? Okay.
Thank you.